Hello, I'm Andrea Parliament, and this is my video on why I rationally support the views of the religious rights in their claims that the American Constitution is being fundamentally changed and not for the better. Most people understand secularism as the separation of church and state, that there's a wall between the two, and because the two should never mix. And while that was very effective in the time in which we needed to appreciate that reason needed the sufficient independence from religion in order to mature and to gain enough information and its ability, freedom from blasphemy laws basically, in order to progress, to reach its limitations as a helpful metaphor. It's now time to realize that it's causing more problems than it's solving. What it does is it creates this simplistic idea that we sort of evolved from religion and then hopped over the wall and then found reason, and we should be leaving religion behind, when that's not really how it happened historically, and that was not really what was intended by the founding fathers, I believe, and certainly John Locke, when he was promoting his ideas through political philosophy. So if you look at the historical development of secularism, you'll find that John Locke was writing in the 1650s, and it took another 100 years before anybody was willing to implement his ideas. And the reason is that in the intervening period, we needed Rousseau to come along to be able to argue and to change everybody's minds that human beings were naturally good. Prior to that time, the idea of original sin was widely accepted and, of course, promoted by the Christian church. And further, Thomas Hobbes argued that absolute monarchies were actually required because, again, man was naturally bad, and therefore, in the state of nature, it would be total anarchy and chaos. So it was when Rousseau came along and argued, no, man is naturally compassionate. It's the institutions that make him compete, and man left to his own will naturally find peace and harmony in a good family life, and if you just leave him alone, he will actually be far more moral than he currently is, demonstrating. So, and he was persuasive and therefore played a key role in the idea, the widespread acceptance that people could manage themselves, and that universal suffrage was actually a reasonable and practical way to govern ourselves. So what's important there is to understand that the essence of what the religious right, I believe, is getting at is that the individual is supposed to be the ultimate moral authority, that the institutions, whether they be a judiciary today or the institutional churches as it was then, were not to be trusted, that moral authority could only really be achieved through the aggregate opinions of everybody. And Rousseau, it was important to remember, was no fan of reason. And remember too, Thomas Paine's infamous pamphlet was not learned reason. It was called common sense. It was the common sense of the people that were assigned the authority to decide and to reconcile any differences between their personal experiences, what reason and science was suggesting, and what religion had suggested. So all of that was to come together in the individual's ability to vote and to articulate their views through the political system. The American Constitution balanced all those three different forms of moral influence and was very generous in its opportunities that it granted individuals to contribute their views through the election of a Senate, which is different from what we have here in Canada. There's far more frequent elections in the United States, too many for some. And as well, there's the public processes by which the judges are vetted, and there's citizens' initiatives, as what happened in California. None of those opportunities are afforded to Canadian citizens as opportunities for them to influence our laws. So the American Constitution is has more checks and balances. Obviously, the judiciary has grown much stronger since the days of Jefferson, but I think it's really important to remember that Jefferson, even as a deist, was very clear in assigning to individuals their moral authority, their ultimate moral authority. So that's the main reason. And now, rational secularism, which is communism, which completely takes away the authority of the individual and of the role of religion, obviously formed by revolutionaries. The first task of the good revolutionaries is to remove and eradicate all competing revolutionaries, and that's why in communist countries you don't have human rights and you don't have religions being tolerated at all. So rational secularism is a form that obviously had a serious long-term battle through the Cold War with romantic secularism, which promoted the freedom of the individual. But that's not really what I want to talk about today. That's not the current influence on America. Today, America is being influenced by postmodern secularism, and that's the type of secularism that has developed since the Second World War, widely adopted in Canada in 1982 in our Charter of Rights and Human Rights and Freedoms, and in the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, as well as in many European countries. And the idea, the distinction between romantic secularism and postmodern secularism is the notion of there being one ultimate truth that we're seeking, that there's something greater that binds us all. In postmodern secularism, the ultimate evil was the universal truth claims of Hitler. And so postmodern secularism was really a reaction against Hitler and Stalin's abuses of human rights. Human rights celebrates the individual too, but in a different way. And here the individual is not given the right to decide what's morally right. Now what's morally correct in postmodern secularism is nobody judging anybody else. The idea that we live really in moral relativism. And when you do that, ultimately somebody has to decide what's right and wrong, and of course the only ones given that formal function is the judiciary. So you have basically kind of coming around to what it was that Rousseau was so against, as Jefferson, as with Locke, which was institutions now arising and having more moral authority and overriding majority votes, overriding the idea that individuals retain their essence as the ultimate moral authority. Now, obviously, I think what's happening is that many people are disturbed at the fact that religions, people who have intensely religious beliefs, are actually forming majorities. 20, 30 years ago, we certainly didn't think that would ever be the case. So it's in this context that we're now looking at how to go forward. And I believe ultimately that the American Constitution, while it is certainly more contentious and the battles are so much more public, ultimately is the wiser way to go. And that's mainly because postmodern secularism does not have any foundation upon which individuals feel empowered to have a degree of judgment, and that form of judgment is not always negative. There's many forms of positive judgment that I think we're missing, and as a consequence we're seeing a rise in fraud, we're seeing a rise in corporate malfeasance, we're seeing a rise in many in gang-related behaviors with our children. So I think that postmodern relativism is the unfortunate consequence of postmodern secularism. And I am interested in supporting the religious right, in making the distinctions between these notions, and ensuring that the American Constitution is fully appreciated before anybody starts talking about making a change. So thanks very much for listening. I hope I've given you some new things to think about, and please enjoy the rest of my website, secularfaith.com. Thanks.